I'm glad he showed up.
Hey, we I tried everything in the world, and it just.
Yeah,
You okay, Jarrett? You got me in, right?
we're good. We're good.
Oh,
Gotcha.
sorry about the delay, guys. Yeah.
No, we're sorry that we were delayed. Everyone's delayed today.
Okay. All right. Good. Good.
Well,
Well,
this
nice
is
to see you guys. Look at that.
it's a new era where we all have to depend on electronics and things that well, I was never taught in school. I don't know about you, Dan, but this is we're we're kind of on a catch up stream here. Suddenly, you
You,
have to
you,
know.
you better believe it. I have students in Japan, and I have to use WeChat and different. I mean, in China, and so have to use different things. And once you get used to it, it still doesn't work right.
Right, exactly. Well, we did a little review of your history, but I'd like to start by just saying that Dan, you were the first tuba player. You were the first professional, really high quality tuba player I'd ever met. I'd gone to the Eastman school. I was still in high school, and you were just checking out, I believe, that summer. We passed cross paths summer of 19 and
Yeah,
at
it's
that
me.
time you and I were the tuba players in the Fred Fennell had just accepted the Minnesota orchestra job. So is his last summer. Right after that, he packed up his car and went to Minnesota. It was the last summer he had the band program, and you and I were the only tuba players in town, I guess. So I got to play. Here I'm a high school student, and I'm playing next to you with Frederick Fennell. And then the greatest moment was when the concert came, you weren't available. So I was alone. You left me there. You stranded me in the band with Frederick Fennell conducting. But that was the first. You probably don't remember it because I was just a kid, and that was a great moment for me.
I think you've done well for yourself there. Yeah, those Eastman days were really quite special. The great friends and the great influences we had, and I know you and I really enjoyed studying with Donald Knobb, who I still consider my best teacher.
Hmm.
And so
He was a bass trombone player. Somehow ended up being the tuba instructor at the Eastman School, and he had a track record that you could probably name more than I can, but I think there were half a dozen at least tuba players had gone through there and had major orchestra engagements, like the Cleveland Orchestra. At that time, it was probably San Francisco with Ron Bishop and so forth, just up and down the line.
well, Emery Remington was probably the main influence of that. He had connections. In fact, Chuck, I remember when I graduated, there were a couple openings like St. Louis, and St. Louis wasn't that good at the time, and San Antonio, so I chose San Antonio. I went in to play an audition. I played the first lick of dee da 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 da, and they hired me. And I wondered, what the heck is going on? Later on, I figured that Remington says Perantoni goes here, this guy goes here, this guy goes here. So that's the kind of power they had back at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had talked a little bit about that with some of our former guests. That is a bygone era where I know that sitting in Arnold Jacobs' studio, again, when I was a kid, the phone would ring and he'd talk to somebody, and pretty soon he's recommending, just as you said, well, I have the perfect person for you. I'll send this fellow, I'll give him a call. He'll be there in a week. He was
That's right.
there amongst themselves. They were populating the orchestra. I guess Bill Bell had that same sway, the famous tuba player in the New York Philharmonic. My recollection was he arranged Torchinsky's position in the Philadelphia Orchestra. Same sort of thing. Just sent him over. I mean,
That's
those
right.
days are so long gone. I mean, now you show up. You'd know better than me. How many people audition? How many people would ask to audition for an orchestra, and how many actually are invited to show up for a orchestra audition?
It gets really tough right now, too, because, I mean, they get about 400 applicants. Maybe I'm a little bit high, right? And of which maybe about 10 of them should go in that way, or to take an audition, depending on the orchestra, that is. But it always sort of discourages me in a sense that we have some really fine students In fact, it would probably beat them out. And a lot of times, you and I and many of us, we have to make a recommendation and call, and if, then sometimes they'll let these young guys audition. I've had the experience several times, and it ended up, and a couple of them won the job. So, I keep telling people, Chuck, when they come to study with me, I say, what do you want to do? He said, well, I want to play an orchestra. And I say, you got a better chance running for Senate. There's more jobs, And,
Nice.
and I says, if you want to do that, obviously you're going to have to train like you're going into the Olympics, and be able to play these excerpts. And I don't know what's so hard about those excerpts between you and me. They play all these concertos and quintets as you do, and that's a heck of a lot more involved than some of these orchestra excerpts. But we, or the orchestra guys, teachers, we make too much out of it. And Jake used to tell me, man, paralysis, man, you got to be very careful. You know too much. And I also think that the students today that come in are extremely bright, and they seem to be analyzing everything, and analysis becomes paralysis. I'm generalizing here a little bit, but
And you know too much, Dan?
yes, I do. That's why I'm not playing too much at the moment. You know how that goes. You got to stop asking questions when you play, right, Jeff? You're the master of that.
That's true. Yeah, better life, ask better questions. My mother just wrote in. She says hello, and she asks to put a light on your great face. But Mom, I'm sorry, but that's how I figured. I've taught him to light his room that way, so we get a nice silhouette.
Is that any better?
No, that's much
wait,
worse.
wait.
No,
We
no.
have
You got to shine too much in my head. That's what I was trying to
Wait,
do.
Jarrett, we have the wrong guest. No,
Oh, shoot. Gosh, I'm looking for Dan Perantoni.
That's his son.
nice.
There you
Dan,
go.
Dan, you've become known. And I've heard this many times in many years now. You've become known as kind of the finishing school for guys that are getting ready to take auditions. That you're kind of the last best stop on how to present yourself. I know a lot of the military positions come open. You've just about populated the military bands with tuba players. What is it about your method, your approach? What it is you tell these guys that you've become so well known as that finishing step?
I'm really kind of surprised to hear that. I never thought of myself as that way, but I'm working on their musicality as musicians, and I think one of the things is lost in these the audition process is they want to play perfectly, right? But you got to understand what's going around you and what you're trying to say, and you have to sound like the whole band or orchestra when you're playing a certain part, because the people are hearing them. Also, too, when you audition for these spots, particularly in the orchestra, there's no tuba players there. You got to satisfy the horn section, the trumpet section, the trombones, and most importantly, the string section.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, they really have good pitch. So all those little ingredients, the pitch and the story, the people who win usually they might not be the best players, but they must have the best message. Then you get into the equipment, and it's kind of interesting, Chuck, in his business. One of these orchestras open, everybody's playing a 6-quarter tuba. However, when you audition on a 6-quarter tuba, most of you are eliminated because you don't have that clearer sound as a small instrument. I'm talking about the string players, not tuba players. And then at the end of it, you got if they're going to do the brook during the section, you might have to come back with maybe a little bit bigger tuba to satisfy what the section is, and etc. In other words, I think we just do our homework here a little bit more. That's all. I try to cover every possible thing, but the musicianship is the most important aspect. Because most of these guys play great,
Right, exactly. Well, you just answered a really interesting question right there. I mean, I hadn't thought of it that head on, but the choice of equipment, here you are playing for violinists and cellists and and oboe players, and their concept of what a tuba should sound like would be quite different. You said at one time, if you play the largest instruments to the smaller instruments for say a non-musician, they'll always prefer the ones as you're going up, the clearer it gets. You'd mentioned something about that.
Yeah, well, too, and a lot of students will come, and when these when the orchestras open, for example, the major ones, they go out and buy a big tuba. It takes you a couple years to learn how to do that. Just like you buy a new instrument. Or try a different mouthpiece. I'd never do that. If you sound good, leave yourself alone, and that's the best advice I can give.
Well,
But then
so,
again, then again, I'm almost concerned about people working. There's so many other facets. I really applaud what you've done over the years. Actually, you brought into our bag, quintet music, chamber music, and you're very successful at it. And I keep telling, use that as a model. Play some popular music. You can do a lot of different things. And particularly today, I'm kind of afraid with this pandemic here because, all the big ensembles, what are we going to do until we get a vaccine? You might not be able to work. What are you going to do? And another thing is kids will come in and say, well, I want to be a performance major. I said, well, that's well and good, but you might as well go into basket weaving for as good as that degree is going to do you. When you graduate, what do you have? That means you can play. I think that's a misguided thing, and people are going to have to be thinking a little bit more about what they're taking and what they can do and have different, yeah.
Well, I know Indiana and Jeff, you two can talk about this, but you really have embarked on a very strong entrepreneurial, that word gets overused now, but how does that translate to your guys at Indiana? You've got 2,000 music students? 2,000 people?
1,570 actually right now.
Oh, that's better.
I think
that's
Jeff knows exactly what that is.
That's a lot.
But this is a small family, even though we have that many. The one thing I like about Indiana universities is my colleagues are experts in their field. I mean, you go down the list and you can see some of the great performers of the world come through here all the time. So students also can go to other concerts and, great violinists, great pianists and stuff. It's like, I always call Indiana like the Esterhazy of United States. There's so many things you can do here, And if you want the expertise, look at, we got Jeff and Dale Clevenger on horn. And you go down the list and boy, all you got to do is listen to what they did.
And then I think we try and go across the aisle to the business school and learn from them too, kind of how to collaborate. And they're so willing and eager.
Yeah, that's extremely important today, Jeff. I'm glad you brought that up. Because a lot of us too is you never had the experience. We're getting students who never played in an orchestra before, and they might not, or maybe get one or two chances. And what's the best teacher? I always thought imitation. Imitate the great artist, not necessarily on your instrument. Yeah. I think my biggest influence is Frank Sinatra, to be honest with you. I listen to more of his tunes than anybody else.
Are you connected?
Am I connected? I have been called the godfather of the tuba. I don't understand why. But
don't get upset. We don't mean to upset you, Dan. You're just leaning in here.
Look at this, Indiana.
The other thing too, with what you're saying about the degree and how whatever potentially useless the value of a performance degree we're talking about the piece of paper and having a performance degree and what that gets. And it used to be a ticket of, look, I've graduated, come get me, kind of. And now it's, I think what you're saying too, is just to not decimate anyone dreaming of a performance degree, that it's who you become and what you learn and the pursuit of the degree is what's useful. So the music education degree is worth more because it can open more doors and you're maybe more equipped for more employment.
Yeah, I should go into that a little bit more. Obviously, too, is, only 3% of us musicians are going to make it in so-called performance, all right? And there's going to be a lot of other different things that one is going to do.
I think you could stop cheering us up, Dan. Why don't we keep going? Sorry.
But anyway, don't get me wrong. I mean, what I like about our school here is you can major in chemistry and tuba. Right. And also when you graduate, you're going to be able, say, for example, you say, well, listen, I'm kind of tired of this business and maybe I'll become a lawyer. You haven't lost much academic. You can go right into the degree in just a couple of years rather than starting all over again. People change their minds.
And Harvard headhunts music students too, right?
That's correct.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but the reason, Dan, it's the idea of, I don't think you know Jarrett very well, if at all. And Jarrett, I invited Jarrett to, it was actually on the advice of the Pakin family in Hamilton. They're very, very sharp. Their ears very critical. And they'd first put me in touch with Jarrett. And the idea was that this is a young player. Jarrett's, gosh, I don't think you're not even 30, right? You're under 30.
Just shy of 30, yeah.
Right. And
I got
Jarrett,
corns older than him. You know?
So Jarrett has won many solo competitions. In fact, that's where I first met his playing. I was adjudicating, and it was all brass players, trumpet players coming in and doing all these crazy things, and horn players tearing your ears off. And Jarrett was absolutely, without question, the finest player amongst all these different brass players, and happened to be tuba. And from his point of view, now he's coming at this from the other side. Here's a young guy coming up, just the sort of thing we're talking about. Like, how does this relate to your experience? Like, there you were in college wondering, am I ever going to, how am I ever going to get someplace?
Yeah. Well, I just think ultimately it's I totally agree with Jeff and Dan. It's basically like what you do with the degree and not the piece of paper anymore. Because, I mean, you can obviously graduate with a performance degree, but it's like, what knowledge have you amassed during that degree that will make you more marketable and more experienced for these auditions?
Absolutely. And yeah, Jarrett, I forgot to mention the fact that I get a lot of people who go and get college teaching jobs, and that's what I'm talking about. If you have 3 degrees, for example, in performance, the damn committees won't even look at you. Mm-hmm. And today you have to have a doctorate just to get considered.
Right. And the thing that a lot of people that I've heard also is that sometimes these college teaching jobs are way more competitive than an orchestra audition, for example. You could feasibly, I mean, if you get in based on your teacher's recommendation, walk into an orchestra audition and win it with little experience. I mean, there was just like an 18-year-old who won the Milwaukee Symphony, who's a freshman at Rice.
Oh, he's unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and he's an incredible player, but I mean, could he get a college teaching job? No, he would need to go through 10 plus years of school in order to even start to be considered. So I think it's crazy when people go that route.
Let me tell you a story what happened to me. I went to the Army band because I got drafted, okay? And I could take 10 minutes about that one. But so I'm in the Army band, right? And everybody else, the orchestra's thing's open. I didn't have a chance for anything else. They were all full. So what was I going to do, Well, Nobby sent me a little note, Donald Knobb, and said that Amsterdam's open. So I went over, I sent a tape, and they hired me. When I came back to the country here, I called again Harvey Phillips, who I had taken a couple lessons from, and he said, call Bill Ravelli at Michigan. He's looking for a tuba teacher. I called him, and he said, what degree do you have? I said, I have a bachelor's. He says, call me when you get a master's. Of course, being Italian, I guess he liked me for some reason. And I said to him, I said, what do you want, a degree or a player? And he giggled. He says, what are you going to do? Well, at that time, there was one opening, and by chance, I got it, and that was in North Carolina. And that was a touring. And he says, look here, why would you take a job like that? He says, how much money did you spend in your education? You're going to go spend 28 weeks and $1 for lunch and $1.25 for supper? He says, why don't you go get a college degree and call me? And it was a dang good idea. I did have the GI Bill, and I had family in D.C., so I got a very quick master's. And that time, I was probably one of the only guys with a degree. That's how I got Illinois and other ones and such. So at the right time, at the right place, in the right context, they don't hurt either.
Right.
So, but everybody's including your resume anymore. So, you have a lot of good people, I would imagine. What degree do you have?
I have a master's.
Bachelor's, you said?
A master's.
Master's.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have 2 degrees in performance?
Yeah.
Okay. Then what I would suggest you do is obviously what you're doing right now would be a very good thing for you to do. And I also think the computer skills of today's things, this is what they're looking for, And I think you could be very saleable on that.
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of interesting that you say that, because when I was in my undergrad, I was kind of interested in teaching, but then got more interested into performance. And
Yeah.
I just knew that there were so many other people who were really interested in teaching, especially high school band, than I was. And I was just like, those people are going to be amazing teachers. And I was always really interested in mental health. It was always just sort of something that really interested me. So I started working for a suicide hotline pretty early on in my undergrad. And then I've continued that work now, and then I keep doing that. And I think what's really important, just like you said, like your computer skills, in order to make yourself marketable down the line, like try to do so many other things outside of music, because there are so many people who can play the instrument and teach the instrument, but what can you do outside of that that will make you more marketable for any
Yeah,
kind of.
and there's there's popular music. Look at the guys now coming on and playing a sousaphone and a good Dixie band or something like that. You can work. You can always work if you have a little bit of other skills.
Yeah.
Speaking of sousaphone, that reminded me. I think you have an interesting story of your early audition at the Eastman School of Music.
Oh yeah. All right, Chuck. When I went, I had a good friend in my hometown named Miko Minardo, and if you guys don't know him, he won. He did arrangements of Star Wars Disco, made a fortune of that. He's a trombone player, and he studied with my father, who was a good trombone teacher at the time. He never taught me anything. He always said, "You play piano." So I played piano for years, and so when I went to Eastman, I said, "I'm going to be a concert pianist." Right? Never heard one, but I thought that would be good. So I auditioned on piano, and my dad. Another story. When I was younger, I got hurt in football, and so the band director called me down, and I'm a piano player. I'm bright. I know everything. And he said, "What would you like to play?" And I thought the tuba was a euphonium. So I said, "I'll take a tuba." So he brought me a sousaphone, and I was so embarrassed, I played it. Okay? Now, I brought it home, and I thought my father would say, "What are you doing with that?" And he said, "Oh, great, he got the tuba. You see, your uncle played it, and he was lousy." He said, "See what you're going to do." So, frankly, I took to it like a duck in water. And when I on my piano playing, I did a lot of listening of jazz. So I used to play sousaphone along with Ray Brown on some records and the like. Anyway, long story short, I get to Eastman. My father had a sousaphone in the trunk. I played piano, and they said, "Well, you're okay. We'd let you in education." At that time, that's the way they did in education. You didn't have to play so well. And he said, "But I think I hear you play tuba." So they called Donald Knob down. I got the sousaphone. I don't know what I played, Asleep in a Deep or something like that. And for some reason, they gave me a scholarship. I never had a lesson. I always had a good sound. I don't know why he took me. Later on in life, I got a very good compliment from Donald Knob before he died. And he says, he was talking about Chuck and me and all that. He said, "You had the most to learn, and you sure learned a lot." And that's the best compliment I ever had. Today's market's different. But as a teacher, I always look for that natural talent.
Don Knob said something similar to me, almost the same thing. He said, "You had nearly as much to learn as Perantoni, and you learned nothing. Now get out."
Oh, come on, Jen. Come on, Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting. We talked to Fritz Kenzig on one of these a couple weeks ago, and we asked him, because, I mean, you two have just had such success with students, and we sort of asked him, like, what he looks for in students. And I know you just said that you look for natural talent. And when we asked him that question, he implied that he just sort of feels something with a particular student. Like when a student walks into his office for the audition and they play really well, he just sort of feels like they will thrive in his studio. Do you feel that same kind of like immediate sort of connection with a student when they walk in, and then that they're going to do well? Or I mean, what do you look for?
Well, we get 40, 50 applicants, right? And so you listen to a lot of them, and most of them sound extremely good. But yes, I also look, how they present themselves and how they would fit into my studio. I'm looking for really, obviously, good citizens and the like. I don't know. If they're going to come and audition for me and say I want to see how well they write, if they send me an email, and if they call me Dan, that sort of turns me off. that way. And
I've never liked that
not
name
I care
either.
of.
Yeah.
You don't like anything else. But I'm thinking, I can't be their best friend. I started teaching very young in my career, and I started really to get in close to these students. And it hurt me actually in a couple of senses. So I got to be a little bit above that. And of course, at my age right now, it doesn't matter. I'm a grandpa here.
Hey,
So,
Mr. P,
yeah.
I wanted to ask, that was a great question, Jared. Also about, and I don't want to give away any, if this is a secret, but I don't think it is. You have the Tuba Basement, and then you do master classes where you have 3 students playing and you just go play. And I bet that experience of performing in front of each other, that's what I'm doing with my lessons as well. And so what do you think the Tuba Basement plays into this at all, them practicing in front of each other all day?
That was just when I took this job, there was a Tuba Basement. It came along with it. I mean, that's the sort of holy grail that Bill Bell started, right? And actually speaking, they go down there and there's a couch and there's like a little lounge and we own that place, right? And so they go by and practice. I don't strongly suggest that for everybody either. But on our master classes, and once a week too, I have a group of 5 or 6 if we're doing, for example, military band excerpts. Okay, I know what they're going to ask after all these years. I mean, and just like in an orchestra, I know the first thing. They're going to have to play that the first time. So I go around the room and play that, you play that, you play that, let's go, so we can do it the first time. And I try to shake them up a little bit. I remember this was a story when I was in Arizona State. I did that. I had Tony Niffen, and I had Steve Rosse, and Jeff Anderson, and several other ones. And I go down and went and point. And I pointed to Mo Anderson, and he looked at me and he said, "You play it." And I looked at him and I said, "I don't have to. I got a job." And not that I'm that tough in a sense, but I like to create that atmosphere where they're going to do it the first time, And then I'm a conductor. I don't like it that way. Change. I want a little different,
Not just regurgitation, but
That's
execution.
right. That's right.
You were in the military band in Washington,
Army band, yeah.
Army band. And that was what a time to be there. I think your colleagues in the band were people like Ralph Sauer and Chester Schmitz.
Yeah, Chester was in there, but he came in with me. He was also drafted, and both of us extended for a year. Then Jimmy Self came in. Ralph Sauer is like a little brother to me, Chuck, like, when I was at Eastman. So when he got drafted or so, I helped him in the Army band, got him a prop. But I wasn't in then. That was after I got out.
Yeah. So you were still in Washington, though, when you...
My brother was a very... He worked for Jack Morton Productions, and so he booked a lot of things. And when I was in D.C., you couldn't belong to union. You couldn't play gigs. But I did a lot. I played a lot of piano gigs. In fact, Jimmy Self and I and a guitar player, singer, when I was going to get a master's degree, we played in a Capitol Club down there, the Capitol. I was on piano and Jim played bass. I wasn't the greatest, but I was able to work. And so I got a lot of good connections that way through my brother. I also worked with Charlie Bird and a couple of things, down in, I did a lot of Dixieland music when I was in the Army.
You must have had White House clearance.
I did.
Well, do you have some secrets to tell us about the aliens in the early 50s? Or you can't tell us, I guess. You can't.
I don't really know, I just
sure.
remember, I used to work White House on piano when Lyndon Johnson was there. I'll tell you another story, too. I was working illegally downtown in a Scarlet Garter playing with tuba, trumpet, and singer. That's all we had. And in walks Humphrey. And Humphrey looks, he says, "Wow, can you guys play Yellow Rose of Texas?" I said, "Yeah, sure, we played Yellow Rose of Texas." He says, "Man, I'm going to have you. Lyndon will love you guys." He says, "I want you to come to our press conference." And I took him aside and I said, I could get in trouble for this because I'm with the Army band. He said, "I will keep them way away. Don't worry about it." Anyway, I showed up and I sat next to Barry Goldwater, who also said he played sousaphone at one time. Johnson never did show up for something like that. And that's kind of funny because when you did those, you ran into a lot of people and they were extremely nice. That's one thing I did remember. They were very respectful.
That was a real heyday because of the draft. I think it really encouraged people that were going to later end up in places like you did.
Well, Eddie Fisher was there before me, and all these great singers went into it. Steve Lawrence. You'd be surprised, as the kind of people that were in that. And I'll tell you, I mean, I learned a lot from Chester Schmitz too, who sat next to me, and then youngie Jimmy Sell. We had a big time. It was good. I really to these days I'm very close to the military.
For our listeners that are not impressed with name dropping because they might not be a tuba player, Dan has just said he was rubbing shoulders with Jim Self has been on all the Hollywood movies you can think of, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, et cetera, and he's also Chester Schmitz was the Boston Symphony Orchestra principal tubist for many, many years. Chester could play anything. I mean, not just.
He'd pick up a trumpet. Yeah, he'd pick up a trumpet. He'd play. You don't believe it. I think he could have won an audition on trumpet. He was a natural talent if I've ever seen one. He played great bass too. We used a couple gigs he'd play bass on. Marvelous.
Dan, I don't want to love to hear all these stories. I love these stories, but I want to also hear you talk about what you mean by natural talent. Like for me, I think the natural thing is more of a way of learning. Like that's someone that's open to hear things calmly and then learn and go stick to something. That one thing. What do you think? Yeah.
I was watching American Got Talent the other night, and there's a 12-year-old girl came out there and sang like I couldn't believe. Okay. Now, all of us have been listening to music since we were young people, and there's, so what I like to think of a natural talent is somebody who can sing the tune with some kind of emotion and feeling. You don't even think about it. Then apply it to your instrument. And that's what I try to do.
Nice.
Hey, sing it, imitate it, now play it, even if you have a lousy voice. That song in your head, we have to transfer to our instrument. That's the easiest way I could say it. I hope that's...
Yeah, and the voice is the transcending the instrument instead of putting it to the instrument. The instrument doesn't exist.
Yeah, and as far as its sound, in our business, you got to have a beautiful sound. On the tuba, you got to have a beautiful sound. And we go through the basics of, the fundamentals and the like. But everything I do, I'm not the greatest fan of warm-ups per se, because people do that and watch TV and they're not thinking. And, so I want to hear a real good note and match it up. You like Chuck, watch out.
You're not supposed to do that. Wait a minute. You're not supposed to watch television and warm.
We can edit that out. Keep going. Just keep them talking. Well, it's 10. Yeah. What TV shows? You say what? Do?
Yeah, the news. Depressing.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's great.
And, like you say, when you're looking for natural talent, I'll have somebody sing something too and see how they do. Now play it. Here's the way I want it. And that's an easier way to teach, I think, too, is just get them listening.
And
remember Fred Fennell was that big sign? Listen.
Yeah, we've been talking about that.
Yeah.
He was totally into sound and rhythm and silence.
Yes.
He was the first one to really strongly talk about silence. He was a drummer, and he loved all the time in between the notes of the sound, which was fascinating. I think he was the first one to really hit so hard on that idea. Now a lot of people have picked up on that. But.
On behalf of all of our listeners here, we'd like to thank both Chuck and Dan for playing with the song. Like just that is what you guys do. And having played in quintets with both of you guys for years. Yeah. St. Louis Brass and that you guys do this day in, day out all the time. It's your number one goal. Would you agree, Jarrett? These guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Dan, I was gonna ask you about Summit Brass, because that's those recordings. My first conducting gig was the Oazen Symphony Brass.
Oh yeah.
And your recording of that is just, it's still in my ear to this day.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I enjoyed Summit Brass. It's been great. And by the way, there's a Mendez Institute, and we're going to host it online. And one of the things is the Mendez brothers have sponsored us quite a bit. So now, anyway, the online program, I just encourage people to take a look at mendezinstitute.com. It's going to go from July 8th, I think, for about a week. And we're going to do it, a lot of master classes from different instruments down the line. And I think it's going to be extremely good. So
you have a few of our ex-colleagues involved in the summer program. Ronnie Rahm and Joe Bergstaller. Actually, you were one of the people that recommended Joe to us, I think, early on when we were looking for a trumpet player.
That's right.
And, you had said, hey, I think there's a guy who'd be perfect for you. Not only his unbelievable abilities on the trumpet, but really talk about an entrepreneurial spirit. This is a guy that was really figuring out a career for himself, a solo career. He was 40 or 50 solo concerts, which was kind of unheard of for a young trumpet player. And he grew a proper beard or whatever to look just like
a little
Mendez.
Yeah. We give Joe a tough time, but he's a good boy. You know?
Yeah. Well, now he's teaching in your where you taught all those years. That's where he went to school, and now he's actually professor of trumpet out in Arizona. So.
Yeah, he studied with Dave Hickman, who was a wonderful teacher, and frankly speaking, I think he was the right person for that place. And particularly for the Mendez Institute and the like, and to carry on with that aspect. And
nice.
I think.
Nice. Well, I think I first met you actually where we had a chance to sit and talk and get to know each other after the years after I met you at Eastman was when you were teaching in Illinois, and you had a fantastic. You took me around and introduced me to composers and all the other brass teachers and composers, and took time you really didn't need to take, and it was really amazing at that minute, at that time in history, the assemblage of talent there. That must have been that was early 80s, early 70s, right?
Yeah, 68 I started there.
Okay.
And, I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest with you. You show up and Jeff was like, yeah, I'm a university now. I'm a professor. Yeah. I was no better yesterday than I am today. So we had a summer youth program. And one of the reasons, Chuck, even Harvey Phillips, when we were going through it, he says, Dan, write 10 things down that you'd like to do. And college teaching was about number 6 on my list. My first one, I wanted to play the Chicago Symphony, right? I timed that up when I was too old and I never got it anyway. But when I heard him play with a quintet at my Eastman days as sophomore, I said, that's what I want to do, chamber music. I just love that. And of course, I got close with Harvey. I used to go up to New York when I was in the Army band, take lessons, and you speaking of an entrepreneur, I learned more things from him on that than just about anybody, and we became very good friends. And when he joined Indiana, I was still at Illinois. We used to get together all the time. We had a tuba trio, me, Leslie Barner, and Harvey. And then we got us started with T.U.B.A. We took that from Bob Riker, and Harvey said, okay, let's go. And that's why we had the symposium. Were you there in 73? I think you were.
I did. I was sitting at the back.
No, I got a picture there. Yeah. But anyway, that was an experience. He got sick and I had to run the thing. I said, I don't know what I'm doing, but.
Wait a minute. Now let's talk about that Italian connection again. He got sick, you say? Sick?
He got sick, yes.
So that you could become.
He took too many aspirin.
Just for a week, right? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, we stuck him in a hospital, a couple of us, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story, and we started T.U.B.A, which was Tuba's Youth and Brotherhood Association.
Tuba's Universal Brotherhood. And I still regret the passing of that name because the euphonium started picketing. They'd have placards outside the tuba and said, well, we're tenor tubas and we need to be part of this. And you guys renamed it the International.
Oh, I didn't do that.
TEA.
Yeah.
That was a movement, but it was appropriate, Who's the euphonium player from Michigan State? Old guy. I know him well.
Louder.
Falcone.
Oh, Falcone.
So I'm supposed to get a lot of people to join T.U.B.A. I call Falcone. And he said, I don't like the idea of brotherhood, I said, come on, I'm Italian, there's no brotherhood, the mafia. It was funny how that took in. So we had to pull a lot of people in, and I remember Leonard gave me a tough time on that. But we've come a long way, over the years. And, so I thought that the idea when Harvey told me to write 10 goals down was really helpful in my career, and I strongly suggest other people do that, you young people. Write it down because you never know 5 years later where you're going to be.
Was one of your goals by any chance chasing the pig in Harvey's backyard?
No, it was a chicken.
It was a chicken because
He had a big chicken, a rooster.
he
That
called
thing,
his. He
yeah,
had a little farm right on the edge of town. I mean, meaning what, 8 minutes out of Bloomington, and he called it the Tuba Ranch.
that's
And
still
his
there.
license plate on the car was Tuba, and he had okay, so he had chickens. I forgot about the chickens, but we showed up one time, and David Ohanian went out, our horn player, went out to check things out in the farm, and he walked around here and there, and he opened the gate, and suddenly a pig ran out, and there was David. We look out, there's David chasing this pig. He was so embarrassed, like, get that pig back into that cage. And I don't know, Harvey just calmly walked out, and he had a nice laugh about that, and somehow corralled the pig and put him away. I don't think David will do that again.
He actually, that's how he married my sister, is he wanted to come to our pig farm and help out. He just chased them all away. It was really sad, kind of. Yeah, pigs and horn players.
Listen, I remember David just met your sister, and I was playing with Fred at Hartwick College, and we had a session there, and David was a horn player. And so he's so excited. Oh, Dan, I got this beautiful girl, such and such. She came in to visit, and boy, he was right. She's a beautiful girl.
My sister?
Yes.
Okay.
Not you. Your sister. You know. Anyway, Jeff and I have a good time. We always do each other.
Jeff likes to say that he traded to get the Canadian Brass engagement. He traded his sister for a job in the David's position of Canadian Brass. So.
Yeah, I miss her, but it was a good trade. Yeah.
Well, David is an amazing person and a good friend, but what a wonderful horn player. Yeah, you guys. That's one thing, Chuck. You guys always had the first-class musicians. I was always impressed by, first of all, what you guys are doing and what you represent to the music business, because it's been a great influence to all these students around it. I mean, you took a children's show and turned it into be one of the best audience and good pieces that, So I'm going to give you a real good thumbs up in the Canadian Brass. I mean, you've done a great thing and we admire you.
Well, thank you. I think the real legacy of this is that we've all figured out what you're talking about, the song in your head, and you're really communicating. And what I've always liked about all the stuff you guys are doing, Indiana's great. Jarrett, you're growing up in this, and I'm sure all the people you've talked to, the result, when I hear you play, you're doing this, you're communicating in French very often. I don't know, it's hard to tell on a tuba, you're just hearing notes, but I think, at any rate.
It's a little bit of French, yeah.
The idea of really taking music out to people and remembering why we got started in the first place is the love of playing and the joy of communicating. And I think that's somehow you've transcended, Dan, from all the students. And by the way, there was a party just a few months ago, and by luck, Jeff and I were both in town, which doesn't always happen, but we came to a celebration. Your students created a celebration for your longtime tenure as teacher, and you had students from the Illinois days. Just talk about a who's who in the tuba world or the music world.
And it was celebrating, what was it, 150 years of teaching? Impressive. It's really.
But it was a really wonderful tribute to the work you've done. And I think that's the best measure of a teacher is when you talk to their students and they have something really strong to say about how it changed their life. And basically every one of them had a story about how the influence that you had on them really changed their entire career path. It's fantastic what you've done. It's really great to have you here as a guest. Thanks, Dan, for joining us.
Yeah, I've been very blessed and been in the right time at the right place. That doesn't hurt either.
Well, the right person at the right time, at the right place. It's really great. Well, we love you, Dan. Thanks for
Thank you,
I love
Jack.
Yeah.
Hey, I really appreciate the invitation, and you guys keep going. Keep going. All right.
Pleasure.
Yeah, you're looking good for your age, Chuck. Not bad.
Well,
what are you, 39?
Lights, makeup.
Yeah.
It's not very flattering. I noticed, it doesn't matter.
You know what? I probably have more hair than you, but I figured it's going to be easier to get a tan.
Well, pretty soon I'll be buying those Perantoni hats, your signature hat. So.
Yeah, I got those because I lived in Arizona, and now I have about 50 of them. I really do.
Nice.
I gave Jeff one, but didn't fit. Okay.
Well, thanks for joining. Jarrett, thanks again for
Thanks, Jared.
organizing this. Great co-host. Jeff, thanks for joining us, the co-host.
Yeah.
And I know that this bond between you and Dan, it's kept me in touch with Dan. You know, here I'm in Toronto, you guys are down there, but the fact that you get together often and beat him at pool and so forth, and I hear about that all the time.
That's not
it's
true.
A wonderful thing.
We lost the last game.
Okay, we have to go now. I'm sorry.
Okay. Bye, guys.